Good evening, everybody. How are you? It's so nice to see you. Thank you very much for coming to the Norman Rockwell Museum. My name is Stephanie Plunkett. I'm Deputy Director and Chief Curator, and we have a really wonderful evening for you tonight. We are live streaming this on Facebook, so you can wave to all the fans out there. But our program actually introduces you to 4 of the artists from a really interesting exhibition that we currently have on view down in New York City called Reimagining the Four Freedoms. And I'll just give you a little background. I'd say about 3 years ago, the Norman Rockwell Museum began work on an exhibition focusing on the concept of the Four Freedoms as enduring ideals that we hope to maintain certainly now and as in the past. Roosevelt put them forward, and Rockwell, of course, painted them in 4 very famous published images in 1943. But the exhibition actually is designed to travel. It opened at the New York Historical Society, which is where it is now, but it will go on to travel across the country and even to France, to Normandy for the 75th anniversary of D-Day. So it'll be an exciting 2-year tour. And in conjunction with that, we actually released a call for entries to artists, to have artists who are working today think about what freedom actually looks like from a contemporary perspective. And we got really amazing responses, approximately 1,000 entries. And we had the difficult task with 10 talented judges, including Pops, to bring this number down to under 40 works. But those 40 works are currently on view at a gallery at Hunter College right now, and they will then join the larger exhibition, the Four Freedoms exhibition, and travel around the country. The next stop is actually Detroit, Michigan, or Dearborn, Michigan, at the Henry Ford Museum. So that is going to be a great placement where the historical work and the contemporary work will be seen together. So we're very fortunate to have 4 of the talented artists whose art is featured in Reimagining the Four Freedoms with us this evening, and I'm going to introduce each of them to you now. They're going to come up and individually tell you a little bit about their backgrounds and their work, and also the image that they have created for Reimagining the Four Freedoms. And at the end, we'd love to have your questions and comments, and we'll just have a nice conversation, okay? So I'd like to begin with Bri Hermanson. Bri Hermanson is an illustrator who focuses on the challenging and dramatic medium of Scratchboard. Her many clients include Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, Sky Vodka Tour Books, Pentagram, Xerox, Philanthropy Magazine, the American Bar Association, Southern Poverty Law Center, Guitar World, and many others. Her work has been recognized by the Society of Illustrators, American Illustration, and other professional organizations and journals, and she is currently serving on the board of directors for ICON 10, the National Illustration Conference, as communications chair, and that conference just took place in Detroit, Michigan. Was really an extraordinary 4-day event that had lots of educational and otherwise sessions for educators and practicing illustrators and students. It was really very wonderful. So congratulations on the success of that event, which I understand was sold out. Originally, Bri was from a small town in Oklahoma, and she now lives and works in Northampton, Massachusetts, so not too far from here. A native of Germany, Peter Zeirlin is an illustrator. Peter is right there. Thank you. Peter is an illustrator, graphic designer, educator, and paper cut artist. His editorial clients include the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, The Nation, and many other national and international publications. For the last few years, he has been creating an extensive body of intricate paper cuts which appear as illustrations, t-shirt designs, logos, sculptural wall art, murals, and public art installations. Peter cuts organic, round, angular, and sharp forms into folded paper to create iconic symmetrical imagery that is largely figurative, representing flowers, leaves, birds, and organic, decorative, natural forms. Jayne Feldman, hi Jayne. Is an award-winning photojournalist, as well as an author and an activist. A former New York City fashion photographer and producer, her dedication to human rights has led her to many international projects, such as work with Amnesty International and the creation of portraits of such world leaders as Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and the Dalai Lama. She has also created an extensive body of work depicting indigenous communities worldwide. Jayne is also the co-author and photographer of Jefferson's Children, the Story of One American Family, which she wrote with Jefferson Heming's descendant, Sharon Lanier. And she is currently working on a documentary inspired by that book. Her photography has appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Time, PBS's Frontline, CBS Sunday Morning, the History Channel, Berkshire Magazine, and many, many others. And welcome to Pops Peterson. After nearly 20 years as a web designer and layout artist, Pops Peterson has successfully forayed into the world of fine art. He is best known for his works on the theme of civil rights and freedom, and his photos and giclée prints have been featured in exhibitions at Sohn Fine Art. Welcome, Cassandra, happy to have you here. And Lauren Clark, Fine Art, which are both in the Berkshires, and of course also in New York City. His portraits and landscapes hang in hotels and homes from England to Palm Beach, Florida, and he was named the first artist in residence of Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, which is an honor that has meant a great deal to him. He was one of our esteemed jurors of Reimagining the Four Freedoms, and he did a beautiful and thoughtful job in selecting the artworks. We're very thankful for that. Pops is actually also going to be featured in, I believe, a CBS Sunday morning program that will be upcoming relating to the Four Freedoms exhibition. So we haven't heard yet when that will happen, but we will keep everyone posted. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Bri Hermanson to the podium.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all for coming tonight. As an illustrator, it's just such an honor to be here at the Rockwell Museum. It's a place that looms large in the illustration community, and just thank you all so much. So I'm going to walk you through some of my work and talk a little bit about Scratchboard. Does anybody here, have you ever tried Scratchboard? You can raise your hand. No? It's worth trying. It's a really, really fun medium, especially if you like a meditative practice. You really get lost in it. The way it works, it's a white clay board that you can ink and then cut into with knives. So this piece is a book cover for Houghton Mifflin. The story is Jekyll and Hyde from Hyde's perspective. So actually they flip it around a little bit. Jekyll becomes a shadowy character, and this wrapped around the book with the shadow going onto the back. And I use a lot of splashy ink in my work, and then the more intricate line work. Here you can see some of the line work a little bit better. These are portraits that were done for books. That's T.S. Eliot and W.B. Yeats. So Scratchboard, it came around in the 19th century. It was invented by printmakers. You can kind of see it looks a bit like a woodcut. They invented it when photomechanical processes came around so that they could create work that still looked the same, but took much less time. And unlike woodcuts, you're working directly. You're not working flopped. You know, when you pull a print, it's backwards. So this, in Scratchboard, you're working directly. Though you're still kind of drawing in reverse because you're going from black and then you're cutting in each line. So a lot of my work is black and white, but I do incorporate color, usually digitally. But I try to work in textural elements from hand-drawn things to give it a little bit more depth. These are both theater posters for my hometown theater, community theater, in Ponca City, Oklahoma. It's a way I can give back and stay in touch with my roots. I've been doing them for, I think, 7 or 8 years. Cool. On the left is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and on the right is a musical version of Bonnie and Clyde. So they're really fun. And they give me free rein, which as an illustrator is uncommon. You know, I'm typically working with art directors who I send off a bunch of sketches and hope that the one that I like gets picked, but this, they just let me go do my thing. So I get to come up with really interesting solutions, which as an illustrator is kind of the best part of the job, is just figuring out ways to tell stories, and to distill a play into one image is difficult, but so exciting. So for these, like, I scanned in ink washes to mix with the Scratchboard lines to just give it a little more depth. The Bonnie and Clyde has some pencil marks. The bullets and the sort of fire from the bullets are pencil, but I can incorporate them all together with a computer, but I'd like to do it in a way that doesn't look too digital. So these are images that I've made in response to events. Sometimes things happen in the world and there just aren't words. At least I can't come up with the words to deal with them. But you know, we have, as artists, tools to communicate and express ourselves that go beyond words. So the image on the left I made after the Parkland shooting. I mean, though it could have been for a number of events recently, and it just, they never stopped hitting hard. Columbine happened when I was in high school, and they just don't stop. But I think as artists, we can create images that tell stories in a different way and can bring communities together and add power to the conversation. The image on the right I did after the Pulse nightclub shooting. And as a queer person, that one really hit me very hard. When violence happens to people at the margins, it's difficult to understand. But I think coming up with visual solutions, for me, is a way of finding peace, and it's like cathartic, I think. Yeah. So I also do fine art work, but I try to incorporate my values into it in ways that are more abstract and subtle, but these are both wildlife illustrations, really, but they're exploring ideas around gender, identity, queerness, and on the right, toxic masculinity, but it's also its sort of homoerotic roots. And there's a lot that you can unpack while you're making beautiful images. And you can let the viewer see what they want. You don't have to tell someone how to feel when they look at something. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about seeing reactions and just putting your work out into the world and seeing what happens. I'm very lucky as an artist because my partner happens to be a writer. So as an illustrator, that's really a perfect pairing because we're always pairing words and images. So we get to do it in our practice together. This was a collaborative book that just came out in March of Margot's poems. And Margot's here, anyway. She's here. She wrote poems based around this lace factory in Scranton that's now been partially demolished and it's been abandoned for years. But she used that lace factory as a metaphor to tackle internalized homophobia. And there's no utility for this place anymore. It's partially demolished, but it's still there. And there are things within us all that we have to unpack. And it's a process. It happens slowly. So when I was creating the illustrations, there are 22 inside the book, I was able to get my hands on some of the lace that was actually created in this factory and ended up kind of destroying it in the process, but I made relief prints. I dipped it in ink and used rollers and made these prints that incorporated into the illustrations. So even though I was destroying it, it felt like a form of creation. It felt really generative. I'm like breathing new life into something that's been long gone. But they tell a story of longing and loss and just trying to figure yourself out, which I think, a lot of queer people struggle with. It's something I struggled with. But the books had a really good response. We were interviewed by PBS NewsHour, which was very cool. And it's good to see it making connections with people and just helping people understand themselves in new ways and understand the world in new ways. Which I think segues into thinking about freedom. These are some of the preliminary studies and the photo reference I used for the Rockwell piece that I made. For me, you know, I was born in 1982, so the biggest form of freedom that I've felt is the 2015 Obergefell versus Hodges ruling that made marriage equality the law of the land. It just legitimizes queer relationships in a way that they hadn't been legitimized before. And it was fascinating to see through the process, you know, looking back to Windsor versus the United States, looking back beyond that to Massachusetts, which was the first state to legalize same-sex marriages. It was interesting to see how much of the civil rights community supported marriage equality, from Coretta Scott King to Mildred Loving, and they cited Loving in the actual Obergefell ruling, which I think is really a testament to freedom. It's nobody should be at the edges, nobody should be a second-class citizen, and now we're not, though it was a close ruling. So I think that goes to show that there's still a lot of work to do. A 5-4 decision is difficult to swallow, but it's a move in the right direction, and we just have to keep pushing forward. So for this piece, I wanted to play with the traditions of marriage and think about something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. So my something borrowed actually comes from Rockwell. I wanted to pay homage to him, and he often shot himself as reference as well as loved ones. So we posed for this piece, my partner Margot and I, and then I did the sketch, which is on the right, and then again, to pay homage to Rockwell, I put the circle behind as a nod to his Saturday Evening Post covers. And I think he has been such a big influence to me because his work is so powerful, but my first experience with it was when I was a very small child. My dad's an attorney, and he had freedom of speech hanging, a print of it. He didn't have the original. He had a print of freedom of speech hanging in his office right above the waiting room couch, and I would just sit and stare at it. But that's also where we first started talking about freedom of speech and freedom of expression together, and it was my entry point, and so it's really special to, you know, create work for this show. So these are some process shots. On the right is one of the lace prints that I pulled, and that's part of the something old in addition to the institution of marriage itself. So that's lace from the Scranton factory that I decided to incorporate into this image of marriage. And this is the Scratchboard process. This is sort of midway through. You can see some of the planning lines there, and the hair is unfinished, and there's a lot of dust. I create a whole lot of dust when I'm doing this because everything that's scraped off just ends up on the floor. So thanks, Margot, for being patient about all the mess. And something new is the institution of marriage itself, as it's now defined, which it can be between two women, which is a beautiful thing, or two men. This is the final piece. Thank you. And I had to work in a little something blue into the hair, the hair clip there. But it was such a joy to work on this, and a lot of times my work has pretty dark themes, so it was nice to make an image that was really positive and a celebration, which I think comes out of Rockwell's tradition of just celebrating these freedoms that we have in the world. And it's amazing to see how far we've come and how far we still have to go, but I think we're pushing in the right directions. So thank you all.
Great stuff.
Beautiful work. That was wonderful. Peter, would you like to go?
Okay.
Really beautiful work. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I want to say thank you, Bri. This was really quite amazing work, fantastic stuff, and thank you for sharing. And thank you also for inviting me here to the Norman Rockwell. It is a big honor and good to be here. So this is my freedom of speech poster that is part of the show. I'm a paper cut artist, and this is all done in paper cut. You know how a kid would do a snowflake, you fold the paper in half and cut into it. And I think the subject is pretty self-explanatory. I think that the truth and also speech is such under attack that it's hard to it's hard to wrap your head around it, that even things like the truth is being questioned, facts are being questioned, things like this. And I think this shows pretty good, snipping off the tip of the tongue, that there is a censorship to the words going on. This was another piece I did for the same show. They didn't use it in the show, but I was so excited by the theme of it, by reimagining the Four Freedoms, that I did 4 versions of the Rockwell pieces. And this here is my freedom to worship. As we know, it's not easy to be Muslim in the US these days, not any and everywhere, right? And it's not so clear that any and everybody can practice their religion, so I set the book on fire. Freedom from fear. If you look hard, you see that that's a figure in that dark creature's mouth. And this was the last one for reimagining freedoms, the freedom from want. And my idea was to show eating utensils dried up like dried plants, in a field. This was a piece in New Yorker does artist calls to certain artists, and they call for submissions. And this is about a year ago, when the Harvey Weinstein and Me Too movement was first unfolding. In the end, the magazine didn't print it. They were still watching how everything was unfolding with the Me Too movement. I mean, if you recall, every day more women would come forward and put accusations on famous and celebrities out. And anyway, they rejected it, but I still like the image because I think
it's a great image.
That angle does it.
Great image.
Nevertheless, she persisted, became something of a proverb, or it became proverbial, the persistence in the resistance to Trump movement as of lately. And I submitted this poster to any and everybody that called for political posters in the Trump era. It was printed in a bunch of publications, and including in The Guardian, so made it. Here's another political poster. I stand with Standing Rock, no Dakota Access Pipeline. If you recall, that seems like an eternity ago, but it shows something brutal, which is that colonialism has not come to an end, that there's still the native people of this country suffering under colonialists and with brutality if they have to. This pipeline is connected today, but that was my poster for it. Here's an image that has no particular reason at all. It's just to show that, I like to do these funky, colorful graphics and play with shape and color and so on. So it's not only that heavy-duty stuff. Here's a music poster I did. And my last piece, another music poster that it's a design for a CD cover. So again, this is all paper cut, symmetrical paper cut work. And That's all I have at this moment.
That's great.
Thank you.
Catching my breath for a second. I'm transitioning and shaking New York City off of me at the moment. Literally got picked up on the train and brought right here. I have 2 lives, and one of them is I grew up in New York City, and I'm very proud of my life there. The thing that keeps me there is diversity. It is not a hobby for me. I grew up there, and I love walking down the street and hearing many languages spoken and people that do not look alike, do not worship alike, or of various socioeconomic backgrounds. Well, that's diminishing in New York, thanks to the uber wealthy. But growing up there, it's part of who I am. It's what it is. It's always informed who I am, and I'm most proud of that. And I have another side that went to school here in the Berkshires and lived here for many, many years. And so I love nature. I'm proud to say that I was a bartender at the Red Lion Inn when Mr. Rockwell was alive, and I went to his yearly parade.
Oh, wow.
So being here is just such a deep honor. And yeah, I'm kind of a weird split, but I'm not a summer person. I'm a year-round person. And this is probably an image that I'm most known for. It was published as a postcard by Photofolio. And this was my knee-jerk response to the LA riots. LA was on fire. And I do a lot of work with young people. And I got tired of what we were seeing in the news, that we were killing each other and burning each other. And I just thought, I can't take it. And I asked the kids, I said, let's go up to Strawberry Fields. Let's make an image of how we see the world. And just to put up on the wall at the foundation, just so it reinforced how we see ourselves. The postcard has been sold since 1991, worldwide. Again, it's an interesting thing as an artist when your intention is, you know, Bri, as you beautifully put it, like just to be able to work this stuff out for yourself. But then other people say, I want to live with that. I need that over my desk. And you're like, wow, beautiful. So I'm very grateful for that. And it has a life beyond. And I went in to volunteer with the City Kids Foundation. And it's 30 years later. And they got me. So there you have it. Yeah. My knees shook. I was asked by Riverside Church in New York to be Mandela's photographer for his last visit to the United States in 2005. And I should mention that I had to go through a month-long security clearance to be his personal photographer. I was strip searched 3 times in various airports in the course of that month prior. And when I got to Riverside that day, I got there 3 hours early. I allowed Secret Service just to get a sense of who I was, that my intentions were only pure. But one serviceman came over and said, no flash, right? And I said, well, I'm just seeing what the lighting is. And he said, no flash, right? I did not realize that Mandela, when he was on Robben Island, had burned out his corneas at the chipping away at the white rocks and the reflection of the light every day. And a flash would rob him of what remained of his sight. So of course I said, no flash. And Secret Service would literally whack a camera at anybody's hands if they were going to hurt him in any way. I have to say it was one of the greatest honors of my life. I'm kind of going backwards and forwards. I came out of fashion and advertising once upon a time. I'm grateful forever for the foundation it gave me in terms of teaching me the power of the image. You get one image to say the whole story. Mandela came out that day. There was a secret entrance. He was very frail. He was helped out of the car by 3 people, including Harry Belafonte, one of his best friends. And when I saw him weak, I thought, I can't portray him as weak. He's Papa Lion. You know, I can't. And as a photographer, unlike illustrators, there's a certain truth factor that I feel we have a responsibility for in our medium. So this was a moment where he had dreamed about coming back to Riverside that welcomed him when he was first freed, New York with the ticker tape parade when he was first freed, and he dreamed about seeing the Harlem Boys Choir sing again. And they came out, and he kind of puffed up in his chair, and that was the moment. So I didn't lie, but that's how we know him and remember him. Yeah. Okay, so, well, thank you for that response. But again, it's kind of interesting. I'm feeling a theme, and I'm really honored to be with this panel of artists. I just have to say, you guys have all touched my heart with your work tonight, and being at the Rockwell, obviously, is very deep for me. So, having said that, there's a positivity I'm feeling from us that we're trying, even with the insanity all around us, we're being honest, we're being real, but we're trying not to feed into the negative that's going on. Okay, so now I've told you that. I came out of fashion and advertising. I really went through a conscience crisis about, okay, I'm going to just say it, pimping products that none of us need. Feeding another generation of eating disorders, false sense of beauty, prejudice, you name it. So I packed up my stuff, I left the industry, and I started doing nonprofit work. I went with a group of young people to the Human Rights Conference in 1993 that was held at the UN in Vienna. I met a gentleman who's one of the founders of Amnesty International. He said, I like you. I need you, I trust you, women and children have no voice, we're going into Bosnian refugee camps. It was the height of the war, and I was ill prepared. I got off the train in Croatia, a gentleman said, come here. And I was like, total stranger, didn't speak English, but my instinct said to see what he had to say, and because I just bounced off the train with 3 cameras on, that's what we do. He said, you don't get it. I said, I'm sorry, what don't I get? He said, you don't get it. And he points to the cameras. He said, they take you first. Boom, done. I never realized that this recording device around my neck would be what would take me out. Okay. Rude awakening, wake-up call real quick. And I went into the refugee camps. And I saw things that I still have to say I work out in my head therapeutically. And every time I see the refugees, it's the same stories. Amnesty was an umbrella organization for something called the International Survivors Committee in 1993. I traveled with Holocaust survivors, Native Americans who'd been wrongfully incarcerated, Tiananmen Square youth leaders, and so forth. Somali, Bosnia, height of the war. There's something extraordinary when a survivor looks into the eyes of another survivor. Language is irrelevant. They know. And that kind of empathy is what I pray that none of us lose with what we're witnessing currently. This is why I chose to show that there is still love amidst the insanity. And I love that you all went, oh, because that's what we need to feel, is the humanity. So, and they were trying to be silly. And kids love to be photographed, even in refugee camps. They run after you, more photos, because it's a way of being acknowledged. So. Okay, so 1998, the DNA proved what the African American community has long known, and that is that the 3rd president had 2 families. I grew up, again, I mentioned in Chelsea back in the day, and in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, I read a book by Fawn Brodie, a UCLA professor who wrote about the Hemmings. I went into my school and I said to my classmates, did you know this? And all my friends of color looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, yeah, mom told me, grandma told me, you don't know this? Miss Yellow Hair? Like, no, never heard this anywhere, never read this anywhere. So my interest in history became how much more has been kept from us. I was always bored in history. I didn't want to read about the white guys who came from Europe. I was always like, where are the women? Where are the people of color? Where are we all? So, cut to 1998, the DNA proved what the oral tradition of the family has always known. Anybody who's been watching the press recently, Monticello now officially recognizes, but some of us actually knew that beforehand. So in 1998, I went to Monticello with no press credentials, no money, but wanting to photograph this family as one family. It was one American family symbolically. As fate would have it, I met this lovely gentleman right here. Shannon, his name is Shannon Lanier. He was 17 at the time, and he is a descendant of Madison Hemings, the second youngest. We brought the family together. We were told it would be inappropriate to take the mic after the keynote spoke. That's my prejudice speaking. Inappropriate. But he was 19, and because it was his great-great-granddaddy's house, he just ran up the stairs and grabbed the mic. 80 people pounced the steps. I got the shot. Erica Berger from Life magazine said, without these two, you wouldn't have a shot, make room, bring her in right now. I jumped in, which also doesn't happen. Any of you who've ever seen the press corps, when they're together, you don't just, by the way, allow me to come in. There was nothing but miracles that day. We kid about it and say, when the truth is ready to be told, get out of the way. It was such an extraordinary time. This is pre-cell phone. We exchanged phone numbers, Shannon and I said, I think we're always going to know each other. I left the mountain shaking. This is what 200 plus years have kept these people apart. This is the legacy of slavery. And this is finally, they're wanting to see and try to work things out in some way possible. Because it's a complicated legacy. We hear the slavery, we hear the legacy of the enslaved community, and we hear the enslaver. Guess what? So many complexions out there, nobody came off the boat that color. It's a multitude, it's complicated, it's messy, it's historical trauma that has never been resolved. This is why we're looking at what we're looking at, and we have to bring people together. So having said that, I left the mountain crying, shaking, and I figured since we broke all the rules, I was going to break another one, and I called the senior vice president of Random House at home on a Saturday night, which, by the way, don't do it. But in this case, she said Monday morning by noon, I need a proposal on my desk. I didn't know what I was proposing. She said, yeah, you do. No, screwing around. Monday, noon. We had a book deal in 48 hours. He was at Kent State University. We hit the road a week later. The book had to be fast-tracked and out within 6 months. So again, seriously, be ready. 7 days a week, 16-hour days for 6 months to produce this story. So, speaking of this story, I'm really proud of this photograph. This is one of the descendants. This is Jill Sim, who to your eye is white, blue-eyed, red-haired. She's holding two portraits of her ancestors. She had no clue as a young lady growing up. She would check when she had to self-identify the other box. Her parents were like, we're Caucasian, so are your grandparents. What is this other? Jill did her search, and it's a really amazing story because this is Anita Hemings, now proudly recognized as the first black graduate of Vassar. Her brother, who was Frederick Hemings, who went to MIT. MIT was accepting blacks. Vassar was not. She passed. He didn't. I think this is so powerful because it explains passing. And the numbers of people who have no clue who they are in this nation are vast. I'm happy to say there's a film that's going to be coming out on the story of Anita's life. And I'm also really very proud. You never know as an artist where your work's going to end up. MIT Black History found me on Instagram and said, thank you. This is when a picture does tell 1,000 words. We are so grateful that you have been able to communicate America's bipolar relationship with race and family. Thank you. And I'm just like, still getting over that one. Yeah, I know. It's like, really? Okay. That's when we're being used well, isn't it? So speaking of which, again, this is Shannon, and I thought this kind of said it all. Like, I got some questions to ask you, great-great-grandpa, please. So, yeah, I think it kind of says it all. This is Dan Hemings, and this is Danny's brother's Confederate flag. Dan grew up in rural Virginia, outside Charlottesville. I mean rural, not like here in the Berkshires, like turn right at the big rock. That was the directions to find him. Dan, when we were doing the interviews, I should mention, so they're my photographs, and Shannon and I interviewed the family, all sides. Those who believe, those who don't believe, those who are first learning, those who refuse, every side. And Danny was raised racist, and he really worked to change his ways, and he realized when he came to the mountain, because he heard these Hemmings were coming down, he wanted to see if he was related to them, and he was embraced by every shade possible. And so he has really worked so hard, he and his wife, to break the cycle with 2 sons that they've raised. And when the book came out, I mean, again, taking some creative license and playing with powerful symbols like the flag, which I had to ghost out in the background. But I said to Dan, I said, listen, I don't want to use this photograph if some harm could come to you. It's not worth that. You know, if seriously, like, you could be hurt or die. It's just not. And the incredible thing was, Dan just looked me straight in the eyes and he said, tell my story, Jayne. Some things are worth dying for.
Whoa.
Wow. So that's Dan. And this is my co-author, Shannon, and his wife, Chandra, and the 2 little girls. And the only picture Pops Peterson said he was jealous that he didn't take. So this is the slave quarters, and I was very honored when you did say that. And this is just a return back to try to teach the next generation who they are and where they come from. And that's Mulberry Row at Monticello. And these guys. I had to leave like on a happy note because they're just, they're best friends. And when they spoke together in Seattle, which is where I did these photos, they're on this multi-faith panel and very serious when they need to be, obviously, but they're also funny. I mean, Archbishop calls His Holiness a naughty schoolboy. The first time I heard that, I'm like, wait, hold on here. And he, like, rapid humor that's like incredible. He looked at me and he said, well, yeah, I mean, have you ever known anyone homeless that long with such a great sense of humor? Homeless, yeah, the Dalai Lama, homeless, okay. Yeah, okay, thank you, Archbishop. So I'm just going to leave you with this story, and the moment that was taken, there was a huge crowd in Seattle, and a 17-year-old boy stood up, and he watched them, because they are serious, but they also tickle each other, they high-five. You know, somebody will ask, like, how do we save the world's problem, you know, how do we save the world, and it's heartfelt and meant, and they just look at each other like, I don't know, do you know? Can you help them? You know, I mean, really, they're wisecrackers. So, so this one kid stands up and he says, look, I really need to understand, it's obvious that you 2 really love each other, but I don't understand, your religions are so different. How does this work? And they look at each other and they giggle and they said, yeah, our religions are different, but our faith is the same. We believe in kindness and compassion. And then Archbishop says, besides, we just wear different costumes. So sadly, I was there with LA Times and all kinds of press. Nobody ran that story. I'm still praying for the day that that runs on page 1. We just wear different costumes from 2 of the greatest world religious leaders. So there you have it. And this is the shot that got in. So this was after a universal worship service at a Sufi community on Mount Lebanon, and which is open to all faiths, and they welcome that. And this was just hanging out and just laughing in the herb garden soon after. And I'm really proud this was chosen. I did some kind of radical, angry pieces, but I was told that this was also very loving and caring and also in the spirit of Mr. Rockwell, which makes me really happy. So there we have it. That's it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pops Peterson. I will attempt not to be too emotional, but that is something that does happen to me. But actually, I think now I realize it's a good thing because it lets me make emotional pictures that I hope to share with you now. I want to know, I first started out not long ago actually doing fine art works, and I was doing landscapes like this reflection of a tree portraits like this one that I did of Beyonce, and I also did cartoons for my body advice blog called Come to Papa. And in the course of doing those cartoons, I got more and more into doing more original creative work, but I never ever dreamt that I'd be embraced by the civil rights community. But that's what happened when I did this portrait of my friends, Donna and Jamie, for a story about can my gay relationship last for 30 years? They've been together like 35 years by now. So this actually miraculously set my paintbrush on fire, although I use a digital paintbrush. And I usually spend about an hour saying how well this came to be, but I'd like to share with you instead a short clip, it's only a couple of minutes, that aired last week in Boston on a show called Chronicle, and that will really cover a lot of ground for us, so here we go.
Main Street Stockbridge, Norman Rockwell's Stockbridge, anchored by the historic Red Lion Inn. Around the corner from the inn, Rockwell's old home, and across the street from there, 7 Salon Spa, with a curious Rockwell connection.
It was just either destiny or serendipity or whatever, or fate.
Maurice, or Pops Peterson, is the salon's owner, along with his husband, Mark Johnson. That's Peterson's day job. He's also an artist who created an image he thought unintentionally resembled a Rockwell.
It was the feeling, the look, it looked kind of like a painting. I said, wow, how did that happen? I wonder if I could do it on purpose.
And so he did, beginning with Sailor on Leave.
After I had done the first picture, it just popped in my head. You know, wouldn't it be cool if I would walk around town and redo these pictures as if Rockwell were alive now instead of 15, 75 years ago?
That Thanksgiving, Peterson reimagined Rockwell's Freedom from Want, with he and his husband hosting. It begins as a photo.
The photo that I start out with is just a bare beginning. I have to change the colors, I have to paint on them, I have to erase things and add things, and by the time I'm done and you print it out on a canvas, you would never know that it wasn't a painting.
Next came an exhibition at Cassandra Sohn's gallery in Lenox.
Anybody who has any kind of interest in thought-provoking artwork has an incredible response to Pop's works.
Even the Norman Rockwell Museum.
He's given several talks at the museum, and he's been involved in an exhibition about the Four Freedoms that's currently touring the U.S.
Just as Rockwell used neighbors as models, Peterson does as well. In his rendition of The Runaway, the man behind the counter is none other than Rockwell's original runaway.
Yes, the original kid is now a delightful man about my own age. His name is Ed Block.
But reimagined Rockwells are not Peterson's only work.
I want to have my own voice. So for instance, I did a tribute to the Women's March. And then my latest one was a commemoration of the Las Vegas shooting.
Despite his newfound success as an artist, Pops Peterson isn't giving up his day job.
I'll tell you something, I would never give it up. What I learned is that the community and seeing people all the time, I don't even have to call people up, they come every 6 weeks. It's been the most wonderful, welcoming community of my dreams, really.
And Pop says he wants to use his art to effect change and speaks often on the topic of arts and civil rights.
So it just shows how I came out of the blue. This idea popped into my head. And I thought it would be just cool and fun. So my first effort was that. As you saw, I took Sailor on Leave, and I went to my friend Karen's house with her son Nick, and we did Sailor's Best Friend. I shot this with my iPhone, and my update was that I would have an iPhone actually in the shoe instead of a nasty pack of cigarettes, which were in the original. And then I did The Runaway. And what I wanted to show was that there are different roles that people play today. Here is a woman as an officer. Here's a boy of color. He actually comes from Nepal. And that's my friend Jim, who was in the original before I met Ed Block. Oh, and then I was going to hire a little girl and a seamstress to update the problem we all live with and do it in a studio. But then what happened was the Ferguson riots came, and I was beside myself. I really was. It was like, I was furious because everybody was just talking about the robber and the cop and who was wrong, and it's just, that was just not what was really going on. What about these kids who have to walk to school every day through a war zone? So usually these things will take me months to put together. I did this in just a span of a few hours. I was so upset, tears running down my face. But anyway, I posted it to Facebook, and I didn't care if I ever printed it on canvas, if I ever sold it. I just wanted my message out. So now it actually has sold. It has been in many publications, but it was the first time I really felt that I had to make a statement, and I had to do it right away, and I'm glad I did. The next one is the freedom from want. I was going to stage it in my house, cook a Thanksgiving, everybody dress up and come over, but then my friends Carol and Jim said, "We're having Thanksgiving, would you like to do your freedom from want picture?" And I said, fantastic. So this is actually shot with my real friend's family, and that's their house, and it's right here in Stockbridge, just a few minutes away from here. I was really grateful and so happy the way that came out. And actually, I was just going to do it more traditionally, but they encouraged me to be in it myself. And I said, well, okay, if you really want me to. And so then it became a gay rights picture, and a very happy one. Okay, so freedom from fear. In this one, Rockwell is portraying how the American family was safe in the US from bombs while the war raged over in Europe. But I wanted to tell the story of modern day life in another American neighborhood, maybe Newark or the south side of Chicago. So here, as the parents try to protect their kids, some families, you see, really are never so safe or so relaxed as in the Rockwell image of America. This is the piece that I have in the Rockwell tour, and it actually is my most sought after piece. It's been on many front pages of newspapers. It's actually in a textbook, and I've sold a few of these as prints, as fine art prints. So this is the first time I actually got to work in a studio. I'd never been in a studio before. I shot this also on my iPhone, and I have had such great response. My friend who owns a studio was so supportive, he actually just gave me the keys to the studio and said, use it whenever you want. The community here has been behind me 100,000%. I'm so grateful that this has come about. Here's Willie Gillis Goes to College. Willie is in Rockwell's image. He is a war veteran who comes back and enjoys a college education due to the GI Bill. This was done, I think, 1944. In my version, the boy in the window is Latino, and he has gone to Afghanistan, but he's made a sacrifice. As you can see here, he's sacrificed a foot. So he studies with a tablet as well as books. His uniform shows a Purple Heart. He takes meds, most likely for PTSD. So he has already had an education. But the bike helmet and the guitar show that despite his challenges, he still gets around, still enjoys his life. The girl in the mirror is right back over there. You can see the original. And in this picture, Rockwell was showing a pubescent girl who was dreaming that one day she might be a movie star. My version is called St. Joan, and in my version, the young girl dreams of being a Boy Scout. I call it St. Joan because, after all, Joan of Arc was obviously transgender. She wore men's clothing. She went off to war. She fought and led and ended 100 years war, and then was crucified. But that's why I called the St. Joan. And the young lady was 12 years old at the time, an advocate for LGBTQ and transgender rights named Chloe Charbonneau, and she advocates with the full support of her parents. This is freedom of speech, as everybody knows, and I updated it as, what the hell? And my point being that black people, women, marginalized, fighting for their rights, fighting to be part of the governmental process and of society. What happens when you actually get in there and you find out how dysfunctional everything actually is? Thank you. And we're going to wind up with for the rest of the four freedoms. Here is freedom of worship, which I did freedom of faith. I wanted to show way more diversity, way more religions, way more skin colors. And I even have an atheist who's totally faithless. All these people are our neighbors. They live right here, and they came to do this for me. I'm so grateful. They're all representing their own religions. So we have a Baptist, we have a black Jew, we have Catholics, and independently faithful of their own religion. We have somebody who is just into spiritualism. And I was very happy with the way this one came out. So doing things like this, it really transformed me. You see, I started with cartoons, and I was doing just things that I just took pictures of. I never, ever, ever thought that I would come to the point where I could do something so beautiful. And I was going to be on the cover of magazine, and it was amazing. I just went to Cassandra, Sewn Fine Art, and I said, look, I'm going to be in this magazine cover. Could I just put a couple of things up because maybe somebody will come by? And she gave me an incredible solo exhibition, Reinventing Rockwell. Well, the butterflies nearly got the best of me, waiting to see what the public response would be, what they'd make of my experiment, something I just wanted to do to have fun. But it was just unbelievable that people came in droves to see it. I was on at least half a dozen newspapers, and I was really, really afraid of what the Norman Rockwell Museum might have to say about it. And I couldn't believe it, but it was like 3 months later, I was presenting my work right here in this very room. And I just have to thank the museum again. I can't thank the museum as much for embracing me and my vision. So, I'm going to go on to the next one. I'm losing my marks. But anyway, I was also recognized by the civil rights community, as I said. The chairwoman of the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, which has been fighting discrimination in Massachusetts for 100 years, came to see the show, and they decided they would make me their first ever artist in residence, a title I've held for 4 years, and as far as I know, they're not even thinking of naming someone else, which is just great, but I wanted to live up to that, and I'm still trying to live up to that. Oh, look at this, they even gave me an award for my advancement of civil rights. And having had this, I can't tell you how encouraging it is, but also the onus is on me, you know? I can't just stop, I can't just switch gears, and nor do I want to. It's just a very fulfilling role that I've wound up in, and I just want to keep on being as creative and make as much beautiful imagery and express as many wonderful positive images as I can. So one thing they gave me was an idea to do a fifth freedom. They wanted to call it freedom from shame, and I had an idea that they thought was terrible. And then one day I went to this dinner party, and there was a young man sitting there who only had his right arm down to the elbow, but he was sitting in a tank top, just totally, unself-conscious about it. And then I found out that he was a hockey player on a team. And I just couldn't believe the courage You know, to have something so wrong with you that people would walk in a room and look askance at you, but he was just, you know, just chilling, just being himself, living with this every day, not making any complaints about it, and having the courage to go out and do a violent sport like hockey. I said, gosh, this is the story. So I wanted to present him as a hero. So there he is, that's Dylan Bader. I wanted to show him as a hero. So there he is with champagne being poured over him as if he's just won a great competition. So I just did that because I had to say it. And wouldn't you know, the Massachusetts Office on Disability saw it and they loved it. And just because of this picture, they decided, well, why don't we have a statewide art competition for the disabled community and their friends? And they'd never done anything like this before. And they wanted me to be on the jury, which of course I said I would. And they said, well, we don't know where it's going to be. We'll put it in an office building or a college, whatever. We're just going to do what we can. So we had hundreds of people from all over the state, most of them disabled, sending in art. And it was another joy, a very emotional experience, putting it all together. And instead of just a college or a business, a hallway in an office building, it wound up in the main hall of the Massachusetts State House, which is one of the greatest joys of my life. And what got me the most was that here are all these people who are just looked at, you know, nobody looks at them, nobody praises them, nobody says, wow, you know, you're looking great today. Get up in front of everybody and say hi. And they got a chance to walk in front of a crowd and have everybody applaud them. And it was just really great. I mean, I told you I get emotional, I do. And that's how I can do these pictures, so please, you know, it just comes with the territory. But it was great, and what was also great was that I got a commendation from Governor Baker. So anyway, I've done many more Rockwells. I hope to have a book one day. I'm doing a whole series where I take a lot of the surviving Rockwell models and redo their pictures. Ray Gunn, who was, where's Ray Gunn? I was like, oh, he's in the other room in Moving Day, has just agreed to recreate that with me, so I'm really looking forward to that. But meanwhile, I do want to do my, oh, is it over there? Meanwhile, I do want to do my own works to show that I don't need Rockwell to show me what to do or where to jump off. So the first one I did was this tribute to the Women's March. It was really, you know, my epic piece. 45 people came to my studio on one day without any promise of any pay or anything like that. They just wanted to help me make my statement. 45 individual portraits were taken, and it took me 6 months to stitch it all together and find out how I wanted to do it. In the sky, the rainbow shows the names of the more than 600 cities where people were marching, and also in the ground. In the front, we have women from history who have worked for civil rights, starting with Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman. We have the suffragettes. We have a flapper girl, Rosie the Riveter, Rosa Parks. And we have a flower power girl, and on the right, a modern American mother. And all the people who support them. The buildings represent the cities around the world where the march took place. And my latest one is this tribute to, it's not a tribute, it's a commemoration, because obviously we're not going to make a tribute to the Vegas shooting, the worst shooting ever here. I was watching on the news and I saw a cop, and he was crying. He was protecting 2 women, but it was just too much for him as well. So that image stuck in my mind, and I had to recreate that. So I spent like hundreds of dollars to get an authentic Las Vegas cop uniform and bulletproof vest. And then I had my friends helped me out with to be models. And this one also took quite a bit of time. And it's not even printed yet, but it will be soon. So, it's called Are We Safe? Freedom Under Fire, because how can we be free if we don't feel safe? So, anyway, these are not the pictures that I begin with, nothing I ever expected to do, but it's so incredibly fulfilling. I never expected to be included on a panel like this with these amazing artists who give so much. And anyone will tell you that this kind of work, people don't necessarily want to put it in the living room. They don't want it over their fireplace. They want to look at it and think about it, but they don't want to spend, you know, $25,000 on something, or even $5,000, or, you know, you're lucky to get two if you sell one. But there's nothing that comes from the joy of having your pictures march through the streets in a protest demonstration along with the Rockwells. Thank you. I'm Pops Peterson. You can see me at Artists for Freedom on Twitter.
I'm actually going to open the floor for your questions, but I thought maybe interesting to start with a question that we received online. And this is actually from Stephen James Petruccio, who's actually an illustrator himself. And he's actually been watching a lot of our programs online, so we're glad he has asked a question. But his question is interesting. He said, as an illustrator, I wondered if the artist felt any pressure to equal the power of Rockwell's iconic images, or was it easy to just focus on the freedoms as their own concept? So I wonder if any of you would want to address that, and if you wouldn't mind speaking into the microphone, that would be terrific.
Sure. I think for me, it's those shoes are impossible to fill, you know. So I think using Rockwell's ideas of freedom as a point of departure and then creating something completely my own was the only way I could really approach it, just personally.
Well, for me, it was also a challenge to be compared directly to a guy like Norman Rockwell, whose work is technically, you know, so much more challenging than my little snipping. But in the end, I think what's important around the issues of the Four Freedoms is the ideas that are being communicated through pictures. So I thought that my ideas can hold up to the Rockwell ideas.
Well, actually, I didn't have to do that for this exhibit because I was a juror. I was invited to participate. But as you know, I was trying to capture some of Rockwell's spirit, which I've tried to with the most reverence and all my skill. And I pray every time. I just want to get this much of it, you know? And keep him alive in people's hearts and minds today, because I grew up seeing the Saturday Evening Post. He was the first artist whose name that I knew. So he was a part of my life. I grew up with him, basically, but now there's people 20 years old who never, ever, don't even know what that is. So we need to do what we can to keep his spirit alive, and that's, you know, my mission right now, and there's more to it, but I'm just very happy that I've gotten as far as I had. But I got to tell you one thing. Somebody put it was on the Chronicle blog. Somebody wrote a comment about me, and they said, "There's only one Norman Rockwell." Well, okay, that's fine. I know that.
I would actually. No, there is only one Norman Rockwell, period, end of story. And if he did what he did, which we are here as testimony to, it is to inspire us to do the best we can do as artists. There's not a comparison to me at all. I think sitting in conversation, so much of him evolved. You know, here race has come up several times, gender has come up several times. He grew as an artist. Saturday Evening Post also basically featured white folks in Middle America for a long time, and he was challenged later to create Ruby Bridges and later to create the freedom of religion and to keep trying to. So I think, you know, if we were sitting here in dialogue, sorry, Mr. Rockwell, but I'm going to take a liberty here, I think he would challenge us to do the best that we do. One of the pieces that I didn't show tonight that I felt a challenge from him was when we were asked to reimagine. I took that to heart. I took that literally. And I wanted to reimagine, for me, freedom of fear was a big one. And although you did an amazing job with that one, and by the way, I'm probably going to make him cry again. He's going to hurt me. But in New York, we were at the Roosevelt House, and I was there with students that had come down afterwards for a presentation. And there was a young African-American man who walked over to his piece and basically said that was, and watched the interaction with the beautiful African-American couple talking to their child. And this boy said, "That was my lullaby growing up." And I just thought, oh my God, here we go again as artists. I took a very different look at that, and I called a friend of mine who is a dancer and a yogi, and it was right after yet another threat in New York. And I said, we got to go down Times Square right now. And she's like, that's the place I want to go the least right now. Really, Jane? Wait, what? And I said, no, I want to create this image. And so I basically took her into Times Square, and she is sitting on the ground in Times Square in a lotus position, trying to have inner peace, while there are two military police strapped with Uzis behind her. And the cops, by the way, were not thrilled at first. They were like, what's this? And I was trying to explain, you're peacekeepers, this is about inner peace. They let us do it. But anyway, so I think that Rockwell probably would have really appreciated that, because I've struggled with that, freedom from fear, every day. But we have to keep going. So again, I think as artists, it really is a challenge not to reinterpret exactly verbatim his work. Why would you want to do that? But to challenge ourselves to keep it current with the times and allow people to see this incredible person who's inspired all of us. So, yeah.
Thanks for those great responses. Do we have other questions in the room?
Jane, I would like to say to you, you're not the only one who's not learned all that stuff in the 5th grade. Every time we go to a lecture or something, I say to him, they didn't teach me that in 5th grade. But it was either lies or omissions.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I went to school in Brooklyn. It was supposed to be a good education.
Right.
Well, it gets worse every time I learn something else that I didn't know about.
Thank you.
Yes. This is a question as a juror. So
Okay.
also kind of piggybacking on the question from the first one. Did you purposely not do a medium? Every one of you had a good medium, but you didn't do the medium of Rockwell, or you didn't pick somebody to medium. Was that because that would be too hard?
Excuse me, I don't understand by medium.
You did, so you're a photographer, you're a digital jurist.
Paper cutter?
Paper cutter.
Right.
Paper cutter.
And you all expressed it differently, but not in the same medium.
Oh, oil paint? There were oil paintings. There definitely are oil paintings in the show. There are 34 different works, and there's only 4 of us, so we could only have 4 mediums up here.
So out of the 34, there are...
Oh, many oil paintings, yes. And they're great. They're just so good.
Our open call was for all artists in all mediums to reinterpret, or reimagine, the 4 freedoms.
Yeah, there's even
and
a video.
And we came in every different area. So, yeah, we're just 4 tonight.
Yeah.
We're
That would make me feel more, I would try my business here. Because that would make me feel more like, oh, I have to compete because it's the same medium.
Oh, absolutely. If you go to the website, I believe also there's even a video clip that was done asking people, So you'll see it in all forms. So
That was the beauty, I think, of the process. Actually, pretty much every medium was represented. I mean, it was everything from moving image to traditional oil painting to some of the wonderful work that you saw tonight. So it was very varied. That made it really interesting. Yes?
I want to thank all of you for your amazing inspiration and creativity. I came to this with absolutely zero knowledge of what was going to happen here, what
Oh, yes. I went to the High School of Music and Art where I learned to do oil painting, and I actually was getting pretty good at it. But then I went to Columbia where they frowned upon painters because they weren't intellectually driven enough, so I could only take 2 courses of oil painting, and I switched to writing. So I spent many, many years supporting myself as a writer. I did celebrity interviews. I voted in the Tony Awards 9 years in a row, and then I did plays and movies, and then I had a baby, and I did a lot of office temp work where I learned how to make PowerPoints. Yes.
How did you get the nickname Pops?
Okay. No. It has to do, I'm just going to cut straight to the point, where I met a young man who just by chance, but he'd been following me on Facebook, and I got to meet him in London, and he said to me, Maurice, I've never had an older man in my life I could look up to, and I want him to be you. So I said, of course. I mean, I really wanted to faint, but I said, of course, you know. And I took on the name Pop so I could do that blog and just write about myself. So he could, over in London, just, you know, hear from me on a regular basis. And if he called me Pops, nobody would think it was strange. Okay. So that's the story. And then I was doing pop art too, so, but that was coincidental.
Great name.
I do, actually. I have a collector there. He's a very progressive man, and he's starting a museum actually in Ponca City. It'll be of turquoise jewelry and artwork. So I'm hoping some of the pieces he's collected over the years will be up on the walls when it's done.
That's awesome.
What museum in New York is housing this exhibit at the present time?
Oh, that's a great question. Right now, the more historical portion of the exhibit is at the New York Historical Society, but because they had space limitations, we placed the contemporary work in a gallery at Hunter College. So it's in the East 60s.
How long is it going to be there?
And that will be on view until September 2nd. But then the art's going to travel to the Henry Ford Museum. It'll go to the George Washington University Museum in Washington, D.C., then to France. So that's exciting. And then following that to Denver Art Museum and to Houston. And then finally back here at the Norman Rockwell Museum. So I hope you'll come back and see the originals in the fall of 2020. So you mark your calendar, okay? Well, we thank you all for coming, and we're so happy to have you with us. The remarks were extraordinary. Your work is just amazing, and we feel very fortunate to be able to include it in the exhibition. Thank you so much to our artists. And please join us for refreshments in the lobby. Our artists will be here, and if you want to ask more questions, they'll be here to speak with you. Thanks again.